Some folks carry their wars home with them, not in medals or photographs, but in the way they flinch at sudden sounds, in the sleepless nights that stretch into years. I knew a man like that once my own grandfather came back from his service, changed in ways nobody talked about back then. We just called them troubled and left them be. This story is about what happens when someone refuses to look away, when kindness shows up without asking permission. A woman, a wounded man, a cabin at the end of a dirt road, and the slow, stubborn work of healing. The wagon driver spat tobacco into the dust and would not meet her eyes. "That's the place." He jerked his chin toward the cabin at the road's end. "The mad ones in there." Martha climbed down without help. Her carpet bag hung heavy in her grip. The driver was already turning his horses. "You sure about this?" "Ma'am, Reverend sent word ahead. But that don't mean he wants company." She did not answer. The cabin sat gray against the fading sky, whitewash peeling, fence posts tilted, a garden gone to dust. She walked toward it anyway. The door hung crooked. She knocked, twice, then pushed it open. The smell hit first kerosene and unwashed wool. A coal oil lamp flickered low, and in the corner, pressed against the wall. He flinched before she stepped inside. From the data we've received, 60% of our viewers haven't subscribed or liked this channel yet. If this story touched something in your heart, we'd be grateful for your support. Your subscription helps us bring more heartfelt tales to life. Thank you kindly for being here. The rooster crowed before first light. Martha's eyes opened to unfamiliar shadows. Rafters above, the smell of dust and cold ash. Her back ached from the pallet of quilts on the plank floor, the only space that seemed hers to claim. She turned her head. He was still in the chair, same position as last night, knees drawn up, spine pressed to the corner where two walls met. His eyes were open, fixed on nothing. Had he slept at all? Martha rose slow, joints popping, her feet found the cold floor. She moved quiet toward the cook stove, not looking at him directly. A deer spooked easier when you stared. The meal bin held enough cornmeal for a week, maybe less. She found a clay crock of buttermilk gone slightly sour, a tin of sorghum syrup with the lid rusted shut. She pried it open with a kitchen knife. The metal shrieked. Behind her, a sharp intake of breath. She did not turn around, just kept working, measured the cornmeal into the pot, added water from the bucket, stirred slow while the stove ticked and pinged, warming up. When the mush was done, she spooned it into 2 tin bowls, set one on the table nearest his chair, poured sorghum over it, thick and amber. He did not move. She ate her portion, standing by the window. Outside, the sky turned from gray to pale gold. Dust motes hung in the light. Her bowl empty. She set it in the wash tub, picked up the water bucket. "Going to the well," she said. Not asking, just informing. The pump handle groaned with rust. She worked it steady until water splashed cold into the bucket. The morning air smelled of sage and dry earth. When she came back inside, his bowl was empty. He sat exactly as before, knees up, eyes fixed on that same spot of nothing. But the bowl on the table had been scraped clean, a smear of sorghum on the rim where a finger had wiped it. Martha said nothing. She took the bowl to the washtub and reached for the straw broom. She was sweeping near the cook stove when his hand trembled against his chest. Something slipped from his shirt pocket. Hit the floor with a small, flat sound. Brass glinted in the morning light. The tintype lay face up on the floor. Martha set down the broom. bent slow, her knees protesting, and picked it up. Brass frame, tarnished at the corners. Under the glass, two young men in uniform stood shoulder to shoulder, dust on their boots. One of them smiling a boy's smile, easy and unguarded. She recognized the jaw, the set of the shoulders, but the smile belonged to someone she had never met. Elias had not moved. His eyes stayed fixed on that same spot of nothing, but his hands had curled into fists against his thighs. Martha walked to the table, set the tintype down gently, face up, where he could reach it if he chose. Then she went back to sweeping. Neither of them spoke. The hand-crank corn mill was bolted to the edge of the table, its iron handle worn smooth from years of use. Martha fed dried kernels into the hopper and turned the crank. The grinding sound filled the cabin steady, rhythmic, almost like breathing. She had found the cornmeal nearly gone that morning. The mill sat unused, a thin layer of dust on its funnel, so she had located the dried corn in a burlap sack behind the cook stove, kernels hard as pebbles, and set to work. Turn, grind, turn, grind. The motion pulled at muscles in her shoulder she had forgotten existed. Sweat gathered at her hairline despite the cool air. Fine yellow powder collected in the bowl beneath the mill, slow but steady. She did not look toward the corner where Elias sat. Had not looked directly at him all morning, but she felt the weight of his presence, a man trying to disappear inside his own skin. The cornmeal filled the bowl. She mixed it with buttermilk from the crock, added a pinch of salt from the tin box on the shelf, a spoonful of the sorghum syrup. The cast-iron skillet sat on the cook stove, black and heavy, seasoned by decades of use. She greased it with a bit of lard scraped from a clay jar and poured in the batter. The smell began to rise almost immediately, warm, golden, the kind of smell that reached into the chest and tugged at something there. A board creaked. Martha kept her eyes on the skillet. In her peripheral vision, a shadow moved. Elias had risen from his corner. He stood in the doorway between the main room and the small space that served as a kitchen, not quite entering, not quite retreating. His shoulders hunched forward. His hands hung at his sides, fingers twitching. She adjusted the skillet on the stove, checked the edge of the cornbread with a knife. The crust was forming, pulling away from the iron sides. He did not come closer, but he did not leave. The cornbread turned out golden on top, darker where it had touched the hot iron. Martha slid it onto a chipped plate and cut it into wedges. She placed one wedge on a smaller plate tin, dented on one edge, and set it on the table nearest where he stood. Then she poured herself coffee from the pot that had been warming since dawn, took her own wedge of cornbread, walked to the window and stood with her back half-turned. Outside, the sun had climbed above the hills. The dead garden cast long shadows across the packed dirt. A hawk circled somewhere high up, barely a speck against the pale sky. She ate her cornbread in small bites, drank her coffee, did not turn around. Behind her, the soft scrape of a chair leg against the floor. She kept her eyes on the hawk, the sound of chewing. Quiet, careful. Like a man who had forgotten that eating could be anything other than survival. Martha finished her coffee, set the cup on the windowsill. Only then did she turn, and only partway enough to reach for the coffee pot, to refill her cup. In that moment, her eyes passed over the table. He sat in the chair nearest the door. The tin plate before him held only crumbs. His fingers rested on the table's edge, no longer twitching, and his eyes. He looked at her, for one breath, maybe two. He looked directly at her face, not through her, not past her, at her, then away, around at his hands. His jaw tightened. Martha refilled her cup and returned to the window. Neither of them spoke. Night came cold and heavy. Martha lay on her pallet, the quilts pulled to her chin. The cabin had no second bedroom, only the main room with its cook stove and table, and the small alcove where a bed frame held a horsehair mattress. She had offered him the bed that first night. He had not taken it. So she slept on her quilts by the far wall, and he stayed in his chair, and the darkness settled between them. She could hear him breathing, uneven, shallow. Sleep pulled at her, heavy and warm, her eyes closed. A sound tore through the dark. Martha's body jerked awake before her mind caught up. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The sound came again, a ragged gasp, a choked cry, something between a moan and a word that might have been a name. She pushed the quilts aside. The floor was ice against her bare feet. Her cotton nightgown, patched at the hem, offered no warmth. In the darkness, she could make out his shape, still in the chair. But his body had curled forward, arms wrapped around his head, and the sounds coming from him. She moved to the water bucket, found the tin cup by feel, dented rim familiar under her fingers, filled it, walked slow across the dark room, boards creaking under her weight. She did not touch him. She lowered herself to the floor, 3 feet from his chair, set the cup on the planks where he could reach it. Then she sat, drew her knees up, pulled her nightgown over her feet for warmth. His breathing came in ragged pulls. His hands gripped his own arms, knuckles white even in the darkness. The sounds had stopped. No more words, no more cries, but his whole body shook with the effort of holding something in. Martha sat. The minutes stretched. The cold seeped through the floor into her bones. Her back ached. Her eyes grew heavy. Still she sat. Slowly, so slowly, she almost missed it. His breathing changed. The gasps grew longer, deeper. His grip on his own arms loosened. His head lifted, just slightly. In the darkness, she heard him reach for the cup, the soft sound of water against tin. A single swallow, then another. He set the cup down. Martha did not move, did not speak, did not look at him directly, but she heard his voice rough, barely a whisper, like a man who had forgotten how words worked. Tommy. Just that. A name. Nothing more. Then silence. Martha stayed on the floor until his breathing steadied into something like sleep. Only then did she rise, her joints stiff with cold, and make her way back to her pallet. She lay awake a long time, staring at the rafters. Tommy, a name she did not know, a door she had not opened. And in the morning, when gray light crept through the window and the rooster crowed its ragged call, Martha opened her eyes to find the tin cup sitting on the table beside the tintype. He had placed them together, deliberate. She rose, crossed the room, picked up the photograph. 2 young men, dust on their boots, one smiling. She turned it over, faded pencil on the back. The letters shaky but clear. Tommy Sutter, Elias Stone, 1863. The fence had been down so long that weeds grew through the gaps where rails should have been. Martha stood at the edge of what had once been a garden, hands on her hips, surveying the damage. 3 sections of split-rail fence lay flat against the ground, gray with weather. Some of the wood cracked and splintered. The post that remained upright tilted at angles that seemed to defy sense. Beyond the ruined fence, the garden itself had surrendered bud tomato cages, rusted and collapsed. Squash vines, gone woody and dead. The soil packed hard as stone. She had found the tools in a lean-to behind the cabin, near the small barn and the empty corral that looked like it hadn't held an animal in years. A claw hammer with a cracked handle wrapped in leather cord. A coffee tin half full of square-cut nails. Their heads oxidized to a dull orange, work gloves stiff from years without use. The leather cracked at the knuckles. Martha pulled on the gloves. They were too large a man's gloves, but they would serve. She bent to lift the first fallen rail. The wood was heavier than she expected, dense with age, and her back protested as she wrestled it upright. She braced one end against a leaning post, tried to hold it steady while reaching for the hammer. The rail slipped, fell, landed in the dirt with a dull thud. She wiped sweat from her forehead and tried again. The morning sun climbed. Shadows shortened. Martha worked the first rail into position, hammered 2 nails through the wood into the post. They went in crooked. She did not care. The rail held. That was enough. She moved to the second section. This rail had cracked down its length, the wood splitting along the grain. She would need to find a replacement, or make do with what she had. For now, she dragged it aside and reached for another. The shadow fell across her hands before she heard him. Martha did not look up. She kept her grip on the rail, kept her eyes on the weathered wood, on the rust-colored nails scattered in the dirt. Elias stood 3 feet away, his boots worn at the heels. Caked with old mud were the only part of him she allowed herself to see. He did not speak, neither did she. Then his hands appeared, large, calloused, steadier than they had been inside the cabin. He gripped the far end of the rail she was struggling to lift. Together. They raised it into position. Martha reached for the hammer, drove in the first nail. The impact traveled up her arm, jarred her shoulder. She adjusted her grip and swung again. Second nail, third. When she looked up, he had already moved to the next section. He stood waiting, hands loose at his sides, eyes fixed on the fallen rail at his feet. She walked over. They lifted together, positioned, hammered. The sun reached its peak and began its slow descent. They did not stop for food, did not stop for water. The rhythm of the work took hold, lift, position, hammer, move, and Martha felt her thoughts grow quiet, felt her body settle into the simple repetition of muscle and motion. Elias anticipated what she needed before she knew herself. When she reached for nails, his hand was already extending the coffee tin. When she struggled to hold a warped board flat, he pressed his weight against it without being asked. His hands, she noticed, had stopped their constant trembling. When they gripped wood, when they held something solid and real, they were steady. He moved like a man who remembered how to work. There was knowledge in the way he handled the rails, the way he tested each post for rot before trusting it with weight. She wondered if he had grown up on a place like this, a farm, a ranch, somewhere that taught a boy how to use his hands. By late afternoon, 3 sections of fence stood upright. Not pretty, not perfect, but standing. Martha straightened, pressing both hands to the small of her back. Her shoulders burned. Her palms, even through the gloves, felt raw. Elias stood beside the last repaired section, one hand resting on the top rail. He was looking at the work they had done, not at her, at the fence. She pulled off the gloves, set them on the nearest post, walked toward the well without a word. The pump handle was stiff, the mechanism groaning as she worked it. Water splashed into the bucket, cold and clear. She filled the tin dipper and drank deep. The water so cold it made her teeth ache. When she turned, he was standing at the edge of the porch, not on it, not inside, asked at the edge, like a man unsure of his welcome. Martha carried the dipper to him, held it out. He took it, drank, handed it back. She hung the dipper on its nail by the well and climbed the porch steps. They were worn smooth from years of use, the wood pale where countless boots had tread. She lowered herself onto the top step, her knees protesting, and let out a breath she had not known she was holding. The late afternoon light slanted gold across the yard. The repaired fence cast long shadows. Somewhere beyond the hills, a bird called a single note, repeated, then silence. Elias had not moved from his spot at the porch's edge. Martha looked out at the yard, at the fence, at the dead garden beyond. "Well needs cleaning," she said. Her voice sounded strange in the quiet, the first words either of them had spoken in hours. "Water's good, but there's grit at the bottom. Saw it when I pumped." She did not look at him, did not expect an answer. The silence stretched. The bird called again. The shadows lengthened. Then his voice came rough, unused, like a gate swinging on rusted hinges. "I can do that." Martha kept her eyes on the horizon. "Used to. Anyhow," he added, quieter now, almost to himself. "Back on my father's place. Before." She nodded, a small motion, did not turn her head. The sun touched the top of the hills. The gold light deepened to amber. Martha sat on the porch step, Elias standing 3 feet behind her, and the silence between them was different now. Not empty, not heavy, just quiet. The way a room is quiet when the people in it have stopped needing to fill it with noise. Her hands lay loose in her lap. The raw places on her palms throbbed gently. Tomorrow there would be more fence to mend, more work to occupy the hours. The Reverend had given her a small sum from the church fund when he'd asked her to come enough for supplies, for whatever the place needed. And Elias, she had learned from the Reverend's letter, received a small pension, enough to survive on, if someone was there to help him use it. She thought about the tintype on the table inside, the 2 young men in uniform, the smile on a face she now recognized, the name written on the back, Tommy Sutter. She had not asked about Tommy, had not asked about the war or the nightmares, or why the town called him mad. Some doors opened only from the inside, but he had left the tintype for her to find, had placed it there, deliberate, where she would see it. Martha rose from the step. Her knees popped, her back ached. She turned toward the door, toward the cabin and the cook stove, and the evening meal she needed to prepare. "Supper in an hour," Emery said. He nodded without looking at her. She went inside. The cabin was dim, the coal oil lamp unlit. Martha moved by memory, table's edge under her fingers, cook stove's iron bulk. She struck a match, lit the lamp. The warm glow spread across the room, catching on the brass frame of the tintype still sitting on the table. She reached for the cornmeal. Outside, she heard his boots on the porch steps. Slow, deliberate, then the creak of the door. He came inside, not to the corner, not to the chair where he had spent the past days hiding. He walked to the table, pulled out a chair, sat down, and when Martha turned from the cook stove, bowl of batter in her hands, she found him watching her, his mouth opened, closed, bent again. "There's something in the east pasture," he said. "Past the fence line, by me at it this afternoon. When we were working." Martha set the bowl down. "Something. Tracks." His voice was steadier now. "Fresh ones. Big. Horse? Most likely. Bah." He paused, his eyes held hers. "And boot prints, too. Old boots, worn soles. Someone's been walking the property line, coming closer each night." The tracks led to a gap in the fence, where the old rails had rotted through completely. Martha crouched beside Elias in the early morning light, studying the marks pressed into the soft earth. Hoofprints, deep and splayed, larger than any horse she had seen. Something wild had come through here, moving fast, heading toward the eastern hills. "Mustang," Elias said. His voice had grown less rough over the weeks, though he still used words like a man rationing water. "Wild ones come down from the high country this time of year, looking for grass, water." He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. His eyes traced the fence line, taking in the gaps and weak points. "Need barbed wire," he said. "Split rails won't hold if they come through hard." Martha nodded. The church fund the Reverend had provided would cover it, along with the supplies they needed from town. "I'll make the trip tomorrow," she said. "I'll go with you. Need to pick the right gauge." It was the most words he had spoken at once since she arrived. 6 weeks passed in the rhythm of labor. Martha woke each morning before dawn, started the coffee, made cornbread or biscuits or whatever the supplies allowed. Elias rose from his chair. He still slept there most nights, though she had seen him try the bed twice now, and they ate together at the table, not talking much, not needing to. Then work. The roof had needed patching since before she arrived. Elias climbed up with a bucket of tar and a brush while Martha handed supplies from below. The tar smelled sharp and chemical, sticking to everything it touched. Black stains spread across his shirt, his hands, the knees of his trousers where he knelt on the shingles. By the end of the first week, the worst leaks were sealed. By the end of the second, the roof was sound. The garden came next. Martha turned the hard-packed soil with a shovel, breaking up clods, working in aged manure from the small barn. Elias built new frames for tomato plants from scrap wood. They planted squash seeds in neat mounds, the paper envelopes from the general store emptied and folded for reuse, carrots, beans, a row of onions along the south edge where the sun hit longest. The fence took the most time. They worked the east pasture section by section, pulling out rotted posts, digging new holes, setting fresh cedar rails cut from trees on the back 40. The barbed wire came last 2 strands along the top, twisted metal with sharp barbs every few inches. Elias handled it with thick leather gloves, stretching it taut between posts, securing it with U-shaped staples driven deep into the wood. "Keeps the wild ones out," he said, testing the tension. "Keeps stock in, if we ever get any." Martha watched his hands work. Steady now. Sure. The trembling that had plagued him those first days appeared only rarely, when a door slammed unexpected, when a hawk's cry came too sharp and sudden. But work seemed to calm something in him. When his hands held tools, held wood, held wire, they remembered what they were for. He spoke more as the weeks passed. Short sentences, practical things. Hand me that. Reckon so. Rain's coming, smell it. But sometimes, in the evenings, he would say something that surprised her. A memory from before the war, carefully offered. A joke his father used to tell, the name of a creek where he had fished as a boy. Martha listened, asked no questions. Let him give what he chose to give. The boot prints along the property line continued, appearing. Elias checked the fence each morning before dawn, returning with reports. Still there, same worn soles, moving slow, though not sneaking, just watching. He did not seem alarmed by them, more curious than afraid. Whoever it is, they're not trying to hide, old person. Maybe. The stride's short. Martha filed this away. A mystery for another day. His hair had grown past his collar, matted in places, tangled with bits of tar and sawdust from the roofwork. Martha noticed it one evening as they sat on the porch steps, watching the sun slide toward the hills. The light caught the gray streaks at his temples, the places where dark hair had begun to silver. He was not an old man, 45, perhaps, or near it, but the war had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with years. I could cut that for you, she said, if you want it. He turned his head, looked at her, said nothing. Had a pair of sewing scissors in my bag, she continued. Not proper barber's tools, but they'll do the job. The silence stretched. She thought he would refuse. The offer was too close, required too much trust. She was already forming words to take it back when he nodded. All right. She went inside for the scissors and a kitchen chair, dragged the chair onto the porch, positioned it in the last of the evening light. He sat without being asked, his back straight, his hands resting on his thighs. Martha stood behind him. The scissors felt small in her hand, the blades tarnished but sharp. She had sharpened them herself on the whetstone by the well. She lifted the first section of hair. It was thick, despite its neglect, the texture coarse under her fingers. She combed through with her hand, working out the worst tangles, then began to cut. The sound of the scissors was louder than she expected, a soft snick with each closing of the blades. Dark hair fell to the porch boards, curling slightly where it landed. His shoulders were rigid at first. She could feel the tension in him, the effort it took to hold still while someone stood behind him with something sharp near his throat. But as she worked methodical, unhurried, his muscles began to loosen. His head bowed forward slightly. His breathing slowed. She trimmed around his ears, shortened the back where it had grown shaggy against his collar. Her fingers brushed his neck, his jaw, guiding his head this way and that. His eyes had closed. Martha paused, scissors poised above his temple. In the golden light, with his face relaxed and his eyes shut, he looked younger. The hard lines around his mouth had softened. The furrow between his brows had eased. She finished the cut, brushed the loose hairs from his shoulders with her hand. There, she said. Won't frighten the chickens anymore. Though I did find that old tomcat in the meal bin this morning. Now he might give you some competition for meanest-looking creature on the place. It was barely a joke. She had not meant much by it. But he laughed. One breath, a single exhalation that held surprise, recognition, something like a door opening onto a room he had forgotten existed. Martha's hand stilled on his shoulder. He turned his head, looked up at her. The laugh had died, but something else remained, a softness. A glimpse of whoever he had been before the war hollowed him out. Neither of them spoke. Then he looked away, cleared his throat, rose from the chair and walked to the edge of the porch, his back to her, his hands gripping the railing. Martha gathered the fallen hair, swept it off the porch with the side of her foot, picked up the chair and carried it inside. When she came back out, he was still standing at the railing. The sun had dipped below the hills. The sky burned orange and purple and gold. Martha, her name, the first time he had spoken it. She stopped in the doorway. "Thank you," he said, still not looking at her. "For the haircut and the rest of it." She nodded, though he could not see it. "You're welcome." The evening insects had begun their chorus. A cool breeze moved across the porch, carrying the smell of sage and the faint sweetness of squash flowers opening in the garden they had planted together. Martha turned to go inside. "There's something else," he said. She waited. "The tracks we keep finding, the boot prints." He finally turned. His face was half in shadow, half in dying light. "I went out before dawn again. Found something new." "What?" His jaw tightened. "The horse tracks, there's more of them now. A whole herd moving through. And the boot prints got closer last night. Reached the edge of the yard." He met her eyes. "Whoever's been watching us, they're not just watching anymore." The hoofbeats came from the south, carried on the afternoon wind. Martha heard them first. She was inside, kneading dough for biscuits. Flour dusted across her knuckles and the front of her calico apron. The sound was distant at first, a low rumble that could have been thunder, but it grew steadier, closer, resolving into the unmistakable rhythm of horses at a canter. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and moved to the window. 3 riders. Coming up the road from town, Elias sat at the table behind her, mending a tear in his work gloves with a needle and thread. His hands, which had been steady a moment ago, went still. His head lifted. She saw the change move through his body, the sudden tension in his shoulders, the way his spine straightened, the flare of his nostrils. "Stay here," Martha said. She did not wait for his answer. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped onto the porch. The riders were close now. 3 men on bay horses, their leather chaps dusty from the road, their felt hats pushed back on their foreheads. The lead rider was thick through the chest, a tobacco bulge visible in his cheek. The other 2 were younger, rangier, with the loose-limbed ease of men who had never faced anything harder than a Saturday night card game. They pulled up at the edge of the yard. The lead rider spat a stream of brown tobacco juice into the dust. "Well, now," he said. His voice carried across the packed earth, pitched loud enough for anyone inside to hear. "Looks like the mad cowboy's got himself a nursemaid." The younger men laughed. One of them, sandy-haired, with a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth, leaned forward in his saddle. "Hey, Elias," he called toward the cabin. "You in there. Come on out. We just want to say hello." Martha stood at the top of the porch steps. Her hands hung loose at her sides. The dish towel was still draped over her shoulder, and she did not remove it. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Her voice was level, calm. The lead rider shifted his tobacco to the other cheek. No offense, ma'am. Just checking on our old friend. Making sure he hasn't gone and hurt anybody yet. More laughter. The third rider, dark-haired, with a patchy beard that did not quite cover acne scars on his cheeks, cupped his hands around his mouth. Elias, come out. Come out. We heard you talking to ghosts again, that true. You see dead men walking around behind Martha, inside the cabin. She heard a chair scrape against the floor. He ain't coming out, the sandy-haired one said. Probably hiding under the bed. That's what crazy folks do, right? Hide from loud noises. He lifted his hands, brought them together in a single sharp clap. The sound cracked across the yard like a rifle shot. Inside, something crashed. A body hitting the floor, a choke sound that might have been a word or might have been something worse. Martha did not turn around, did not let her expression change, but her jaw tightened, and the knuckles of her right hand went white where it gripped the porch railing. That's enough, she said. The lead rider grinned. Just having a little fun, ma'am. No harm meant. I said that's enough. She walked down the porch steps, slowly, deliberately. Her boots raised small puffs of dust with each step. The men's horses shifted, uneasy, and the sandy-haired rider's smirk faltered. Martha stopped 10 feet from the lead horse, close enough to see tobacco stains on the rider's teeth, close enough to smell sweat on the horse's flanks. You know this man, she asked. Her voice had not risen. If anything, it had grown quieter. The lead rider shrugged. Everybody knows Elias Stone. Came back from the war all scrambled up. He used to be decent before he went crazy. He served, Martha said. Did you? The rider's grin flickered. That ain't. Did you serve silence? The sandy-haired rider glanced at his companions. The one with the patchy beard studied his horse's mane with sudden interest. That's what I thought. Martha took another step forward. Her eyes never left the lead rider's face. He went to war so men like you could stay home. He saw things you couldn't imagine. And now you ride up here, to his home, and mock him for what the war done to him. She let the words hang in the air. Y'all done go on home. The silence stretched. The horses stamped and blew. A fly buzzed somewhere nearby. The sound loud in the stillness. Then the lead rider pulled his horse's head around. He did not look at Martha, did not look at the cabin. He just turned and kicked his mount into a trot, heading back toward the road. The other two followed. The sandy-haired one glanced back once, a quick, furtive look that might have held shame, but Martha met his eyes and held them until he turned away. She watched until they disappeared over the rise, until the sound of hoofbeats faded into silence, until there was nothing left but the wind and the distant call of a hawk. Then she turned and walked back to the cabin. Inside, Elias was on the floor. He had wedged himself into the corner near the cook stove, his back pressed against the wall, his arms wrapped around his head. His whole body shook violent tremors that traveled through his shoulders, his spine, his legs curled tight beneath him. Martha lowered herself to the floor beside him, not touching, just near. They're gone, she said. Her voice was soft now. The steel melted away. They won't be back. He did not respond. The tremors continued. His breathing came in ragged gasps, each inhale a struggle. Martha waited. The minutes passed. The light through the asewing window shifted from gold to amber. The shadows lengthened across the floor. She sat with her back against the wall, her shoulder 3 inches from his. and she waited. Slowly, so slowly, it was almost imperceptible, his breathing began to change. The gasps grew longer. The tremors lessened. His arms loosened their grip on his head. He lifted his face. His eyes were wet. His cheeks were wet. He looked at her with an expression she could not read, something between shame and gratitude, and a grief so old it had become stone. "You didn't have to do that," he said. His voice was raw, scraped hollow. "Yes, I did." He shook his head. "They'll talk. Whole town will know by tomorrow. Woman standing up for the crazy man." "I don't care what they say." He stared at her. The wetness on his cheeks caught the amber light. "Why?" The word was barely a whisper. "Why do you stay? I'm not worth it." Martha looked at him for a long moment. At the lines carved deep around his eyes, at the gray in his hair, at the hands that had rebuilt fences and patched roofs and done honest work for weeks. "My husband died 2 years ago," she said. "Fever took him in the spring. After that, I didn't have anywhere to go. No family left. Just a widow with nothing but time." She paused. "Reverend wrote to me about you. The way folks talked like you were something less than human. I know what it feels like to be alone, to have people look through you." Elias had risen to his feet. He stood watching her with those haunted eyes. "So you just came. I came. Without knowing what you'd find." "Yes." He shook his head slowly. "I could have been dangerous. But you weren't," Martha said. "And you aren't." They stood under the fading light, the fire cold in the cook stove, the silence between them no longer empty. Then Elias turned toward the window. His body went still, not the frozen terror of before, but the alertness of a man who had heard something. "Martha, what is it?" He moved to the window, looked out at the yard, at the road, at the darkening hills. Those 3 rode horses with new shoes, clean edges, fresh iron. He turned back to face her. "The boot prints I've been tracking, they're from someone else. Old boots, worn soles, and they weren't made by anyone from town." Martha felt something cold move through her chest. "I checked the east fence this morning," Elias said. "The prints circled the whole property, and last night—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "Last night, they came all the way to the porch. They sat awake past midnight, watching the windows." Martha had pulled the shutters closed on the west side of the cabin. Elias had checked the door twice, then a third time, testing the bar that held it shut. Now they sat at the table with the coal oil lamp turned low, its flame a small yellow tongue licking at the darkness. The coffee in their tin cups had gone cold hours ago. "Could be an animal," Martha said. "Looking for scraps." Elias shook his head. "Animals don't circle. Don't come closer every night like they're studying something." His eyes stayed fixed on the lamp flame. "This is a person. Someone with a reason." The silence settled back over them. Outside, the wind moved through the sage, a dry rustling that sounded almost like footsteps. Martha's hands tightened around her cup. She forced them to relax. "I should go out there," Elias said. "Check the perimeter." In the dark, alone. Better than sitting here, waiting. Before she could argue, he was on his feet. He lifted the bar from the door, eased it open, and stepped into the night. Martha rose to follow, but he held up a hand. "Stay inside. If something happens, Elias, please." The words stopped her. He had never said please to her before. Anna lowered herself back into the chair and watched him disappear into the darkness beyond the porch. The minutes stretched. Martha counted her heartbeats. 20, 50, 100. She heard him before she saw him, a crash, a grunt of pain. Then the sound of something heavy hitting wet earth. She was at the door before she knew she had moved, yanking it open, the lamp in her hand throwing wild shadows across the yard. Elias. He was on the ground near the well. The recent rains had turned the soil there into a slick of mud, and he had gone down hard. His hands and knees sank into the muck. His face was spattered with it, dark streaks across his cheeks, his forehead, clinging to his hair. But he was not trying to get up. Martha set the lamp on the porch railing and hurried across the yard, her boots squelching in the soft earth. When she reached him, she saw that his whole body was shaking. Not from cold, not from the fall. Elias, come on, let's get you inside. He did not move. His head hung low, chin nearly touching his chest. The tremors ran through him in waves, and his breathing came in short, ragged gasps. I can't, he said. The words were barely audible. I can't do this anymore. Can't do what? Any of it. His hands clenched in the mud, squeezing the wet earth between his fingers. The watching, the waiting, the sounds in my head that won't stop. Martha crouched beside him. The mud soaked through the hem of her dress, cold and heavy. She did not care. What sounds? He lifted his head. In the faint light from the porch lamp, she could see his face, the mud, the tears cutting tracks through it, the raw devastation in his eyes. Cannon fire, he said, every night. Every time I close my eyes, the sound of cannon fire, and then the screaming, and then... He stopped. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. And then what? The question hung between them. The wind moved through the sage, somewhere far off. A coyote called into the darkness. Tommy, Elias said. The name came out broken, splintered. Tommy Sutter. He was 18 years old. I lied about his age to enlist, because he wanted to fight alongside me. Said I was like a brother to him. Martha waited. The mud seeped cold through her knees. Sound came first. Always the sound. Then the smoke. Couldn't see 10 feet in front of your face. His voice had gone flat, mechanical, like he was reciting something he had told himself 1,000 times in the dark. We were running for the trees, all of us, trying to get out of the crossfire. He pulled one hand from the mud, stared at it. The earth caked black under his fingernails, filling the lines of his palm. Tommy went down, took a ball in the leg. He was screaming for me. I could hear him screaming my name through all that noise. His hand dropped back into the mud. I ran. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. I ran, and I left him there, left him screaming in the smoke while I saved myself. Martha's throat tightened. She did not speak. They found him the next morning. The surgeons. His leg was gone. They'd taken it in the night to try to save him, but the fever got him anyway. Took 3 days. Elias's voice cracked. 3 days of him asking for me, and I couldn't even go to him. Couldn't look at his face. He bent forward, his forehead touching the mud, his hands spread in the muck on either side of his head. A man with nothing left, No pride, no pretense, no armor between himself and the weight of what he carried. I should have been the one, he said into the earth. Should have been me who got hit, me who died in that hospital tent. Not him, never him. The wind picked up. The lamp flame on the porch guttered and nearly went out. Martha reached down. Her fingers found his arm mud-slicked, trembling, cold. She did not pull him up, did not try to lift him from the ground. She just held on. You were afraid, she said. Everyone is afraid. I was a coward. You were a man trying to survive. I left him. His voice broke completely. I left him, and he died calling my name. And I have spent 13 years trying to outrun the sound of it, and I can't. The sobs came then, deep, wrenching sounds that tore up from his chest and shook his whole body. He wept into the mud, into the cold earth, and Martha kept her hand on his arm and did not move. She did not tell him it was all right. It was not all right. It would never be all right. She did not tell him Tommy would have forgiven him. She did not know if that was true. She just stayed, knees in the mud, hand on his arm, present in the darkness while he fell apart. The lamp burned lower. The coyote called again, closer now. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and indifferent. And still Martha stayed. When the sobs finally quieted, not stopped, just quieted, easing into ragged breaths and shuddering exhalations, she spoke. You're here, she said. That's all that matters now. You're here. He lifted his head. His face was a ruined mud and tears and the raw, scraped open look of a man who had shown the worst thing inside himself and was waiting for the world to turn away. Martha did not turn away. She took his hand, his mud-caked, shaking hand. She held it in both of hers and did not let go. You're here, she said again, and I'm not leaving. They stayed that way, kneeling in the mud, hands clasped, the lamp guttering on the porch until the eastern sky began to lighten. And when the first gray light of dawn touched the hills, Martha heard it. Hoofbeats. Not from the south this time. From the east. From the direction of the wild horse tracks. Coming fast! The Mustang came through the east fence like a thunderclap. Martha heard the wire snap first a high, singing twang that cut through the dawn air, then the crack of splintering wood. Then the sound she would never forget, hooves pounding against packed earth, wild and panicked and unstoppable. She scrambled to her feet. The mud sucked at her boots, at the hem of her dress. Elias was already up, his face still streaked with the remnants of his breakdown, his eyes fixed on the eastern pasture. The horse burst into view. It was a Mustang, big, dark-coated, its mane matted with burrs and tangles. But something was wrong. It ran crooked, favoring its left foreleg. And even from 50 yards away, Martha could see the dark blood streaming down the leg, could see the ragged tear where the barbed wire had caught it. Behind the Mustang, the cattle that grazed the east pasture scattered in panic. Their hooves churned the dry ground into a cloud of ochre dust. Their bellowing mixed with the horses' screams high. Terrified sounds that split the morning like a blade. The Mustang hit the garden fence and went through it. Rails flew. Posts snapped. The horse stumbled. Nearly went down, then found its footing and kept running straight toward the cabin, straight toward the well, straight toward them. Elias had gone rigid. His hands gripped the porch railing so hard the wood creaked. His face had drained of color. leaving it gray-white beneath the mud stains. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. The hooves, the chaos, the screaming. Martha saw it all crashing down on him, every sound, every sensation, dragging him back to whatever battlefield still lived inside his skull. His legs buckled. He caught himself against the railing, but barely. "Elias." He did not respond. His eyes had gone distant, unfocused, staring at something she could not see. The Mustang careened past the well, nearly clipping the pump handle. It circled the yard in a wild, limping arc, kicking up dust, its wounded leg trailing blood in the dirt. The cattle had reached the broken garden fence and were pushing through, their wide horns tangling in the fallen rails. Elias. Still nothing. He had slid down the porch railing until he was half kneeling, half collapsed against the boards. His hands covered his ears. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. The Mustang reared. Its hooves slashed the air inches from the porch steps. Martha stumbled backward, her heel catching on a warped board, and went down hard on the planks. Pain shot up her spine. The horse screamed again, a sound of pure terror and agony, and came down with its front hooves slamming into the packed earth. One of the cattle, a young heifer with a white blaze on its face, bolted past the horse and crashed into the ray barrel beside the cabin. Water exploded across the porch. The barrel rolled, struck the wall, split along its seams. Chaos. Pure chaos. Dust and noise and the smell of blood and fear. Martha pushed herself up on her elbows. Her back throbbed. Her hands were scraped raw from the porch boards. She turned her head toward Elias. He had not moved. Still huddled against the railing, still covering his ears, still trapped somewhere far away from here. The Mustang circled again, slower this time. Its injured leg dragged, painting a crimson line in the dirt. Its eyes rolled, showing white. Foam flecked its muzzle. If it kept running, it would tear that leg open worse. If it kept panicking, it would hurt itself beyond saving or hurt one of them. Someone had to stop it. Martha looked at Elias, at his shaking shoulders, at his white-knuckled hands pressed against his skull. She could do it herself, could try to approach the horse, calm it down, get a rope around its neck. She had never worked with horses, not really. Not wild ones, but she could try. Or, Elias. She did not shout, did not plead. Just said his name, steady and clear, the way she might say it across the breakfast table. He did not move. Elias. The Mustang had stopped in the middle of the yard. It stood trembling, its wounded leg lifted off the ground, its head swinging from side to side. The cattle had scattered to the edges of the property, their bellowing fading to uncertain lows. The worst of the chaos was passing, but the horse stood there, bleeding, terrified. Elias. This time, something shifted. His hands lowered from his ears, his head lifted, slowly, like a man surfacing from deep water. Martha met his eyes. She did not tell him it would be all right, did not tell him he could do it, did not offer encouragement or comfort or any of the words that people said when they wanted to help, but did not know how. She just looked at him, held his gaze, let him see that she was here, that the world was still here, that whatever battlefield lived in his mind was not the same as this yard, this morning, this wounded animal. Elias blinked. His breathing slowed. His hands unclenched. He looked at the horse. The Mustang stood 30 feet away, its body quivering with exhaustion and pain. Blood dripped from its foreleg in a steady rhythm, plip, 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 darkening the dust beneath it. Its ears flicked back and forth, listening for the next threat. Elias pushed himself up from the railing. His legs shook, his whole body shook. But he was standing. He was moving. He stepped down from the porch, one foot after the other, his boots leaving prints in the muddy ground. The horse's head snapped toward him. Its nostrils flared. A low sound rumbled in its chest, not a scream, but a warning. Elias stopped. He stood 10 feet from the animal, close enough to see the wire cuts on its leg, the raw flesh where the barbs had torn through hide and muscle, close enough to smell the blood, the sweat, the fear rolling off the horse in waves. His hand lifted, slow, steady, palm up, fingers loose. Easy now. His voice came out rough, cracked, but quiet, the kind of voice you used for frightened things, for wounded things, for creatures that had been hurt and did not know if you meant to hurt them more. Easy, boy. I ain't gonna hurt you. The horse's ears swiveled forward. Its nostrils worked, pulling in his scent. The trembling in its legs did not stop, but something in its posture shifted the coiled readiness to bolt, easing by a fraction. Elias took a step forward. The horse flinched, its head tossed. For a moment, Martha thought it would run again, would tear itself apart trying to escape this man who smelled of mud and fear and old sorrow. But Elias did not stop. I know, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper now. I know you're scared. I know it hurts. But you gotta let me help you. Can you do that? He had done this before. Martha could see it in the way he moved, the careful patience, the understanding of how a frightened animal thought. Back on his father's place, he had said, before the war, before everything. The horse blew out a long breath. Its head lowered at just an inch, just a fraction. Elias took another step, then another. Then he was standing beside the animal, close enough to touch, close enough to feel the heat radiating off its sweat-soaked hide. He reached out. His fingers touched the horse's neck. The muscles beneath the skin quivered, but the horse did not pull away. Elias let his hand rest there, feeling the rapid pulse beneath his palm, the life and terror and strength of this creature that had been so badly hurt. That's it, he murmured. That's it. You're all right now. The horse's head dropped lower. Its muzzle brushed Elias's shoulder, leaving a wet smear of foam on his shirt. A sound came from it, not a scream, not a warning, but something softer, a sigh, an exhale of surrender. Elias's face was wet. He did not wipe it, did not try to hide it. He stood in the yard with his hand on the horse's neck, and he let the tears fall. Let them cut tracks through the mud that still clung to his cheeks. Martha watched from the porch. She did not move, did not speak, did not do anything to break the fragile moment unfolding before her. He had walked into the chaos, had faced the sound of hooves and the smell of blood, and all the things that dragged him back to that place he could never escape. Had chosen to move forward instead of hiding. No one had saved him. He had saved himself. The horse stood quiet now, its trembling eased, its head resting against Elias's chest. The cattle had settled at the edges of the property, grazing as if nothing had happened. The dust was settling. The sun was climbing. Martha rose from the porch. Her legs ached. Her back throbbed. But she walked across the yard to where Elias stood with the wounded animal. "We need to tend that leg," she said. He nodded, and his voice was steady when he spoke. "Rope halters in the barn, some clean rags and liniment, too." "I'll get them." She turned toward the barn, took 3 steps, stopped. Something had caught her eye, movement at the edge of the property, near the tree line that marked the boundary between Elias's land and the wild country beyond. A figure, standing in the shadows between 2 oaks, watching. The figure stepped out of the shadows. Martha's hand found Elias's arm. Her fingers tightened. But the figure did not move toward them, just stood at the edge of the tree line, watching. An old man, white-haired, stooped at the shoulders, wearing clothes so faded and patched they seemed to blend into the bark behind him. His face was weathered to the color of saddle leather, creased with lines that spoke of decades spent under open sky. "That's my horse," he said. His voice carried across the distance, thin, reedy, but clear. "Been tracking her 3 days. Wire got her before I could." Elias did not release the Mustang. His hand stayed on her neck, steady, calming. "She's hurt bad," he said. "Needs tending." The old man nodded slowly. He took a step forward, then another, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned not to spook wild things. When he reached the edge of the yard, he stopped. "You the one they call mad, no malice in the question. Just curiosity. The way you might ask about the weather?" Elias's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "Some do." The old man studied him for a long moment. His eyes pale blue, nearly colorless in the morning light, moved from Elias's face to his hand, on the horse's neck, to the blood drying on his shirt. "She don't let just anyone touch her," he said. "Took me 2 years to get close enough to halter her. And here you are. First meeting, hand on her neck like you've known her all your life." He shook his head slowly. "Mad, they say. Looks more like gifted to me." The old man's name was Harlan. He had a cabin somewhere in the hills to the east. Had been running a small herd of Mustangs for 15 years. The mare, he called her Dusty, had been with him since she was a foal. When the herd spooked 3 nights ago, she had run the wrong direction, gotten tangled in someone's fence wire, and bolted before he could reach her. He had been tracking her ever since. Had watched the cabin from a distance, trying to figure out if the people here would help or hurt. Had seen Martha face down the 3 riders. Had seen Elias fall apart in the mud and put himself back together. "Didn't want to intrude," he said. He sat on the porch steps now, a cup of coffee in his weathered hands, while Martha cleaned and bandaged the mare's leg in the small corral beside the barn. "Figured you 2 had enough going on without some stranger walking up." Elias leaned against the corral fence, watching Martha work. Her hands moved with careful precision, wrapping the clean rags around the wound, securing them with strips of cloth torn from an old bedsheet. "You could have come sooner," Elias said. "Saved us some trouble." Harlan shrugged. "Could have, but then I wouldn't have seen what I saw." He took a sip of coffee. "Man who can calm a wild horse in the middle of a stampede, that's not something you see every day." Elias said nothing. His eyes stayed on the mare, on Martha's hands, on the slow and patient work of healing. The days settled into a new rhythm. Harlan stayed 3 nights, sleeping in the barn. helping repair the damage the stampede had caused. He spoke little, but worked steadily, his old hands still strong enough to swing a hammer, to stretch wire, to lift rails into place. When the fence was mended and the garden restored, he saddled his own horse, a gray gelding he had left tied in the trees, and prepared to leave. "She needs another week before she can travel," he said, nodding toward Dusty. The mare stood in the corral, her bandaged leg bearing weight now, her eyes calm. "Mind keeping her till then?" Elias shook his head. "Don't mind." Harlan mounted up, looked down at Elias, then at Martha, who stood on the porch with her arms crossed against the morning chill. "You two take care of each other," he said. It was not a question. He touched the brim of his hat and rode east, toward the hills, until he was just a speck against the pale sky and then nothing at all. The week passed. Elias tended the mare each morning. Martha watched from the porch, coffee cup warming her hands, as he cleaned the wound and changed the bandages. He talked to the horse while he worked low, steady sounds that were not quite words, just a voice offering comfort in the language that animals understood. The mare's leg healed clean, no infection, no fever. By the 5th day, she was putting full weight on it. By the 7th, she was trotting circles in the corral, tossing her head, impatient to run. On the 8th morning, Elias opened the corral gate. The mare stood in the opening, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. The east pasture stretched before her, the mended fence a dark line against the golden grass, the hills rising blue and distant beyond. She did not run. She turned her head, looked at Elias, looked at Martha. Then she walked, not bolted. Walked out of the corral and across the yard to the water trough. She drank deep, water dripping from her muzzle, and when she lifted her head, she walked back to stand beside Elias. He reached up, touched her neck. She leaned into his hand. "Reckon she's not ready to leave yet," Martha said from the porch. Elias did not answer, but something moved across his face, something that might have been surprise or gratitude, or the beginning of something he did not have words for. They walked the east pasture that afternoon. The grass was turning gold with the season's change, rippling in waves when the wind moved through it. The cattle grazed in loose clusters, their coats sleek, their bellies round. The fence held firm, wire taut between the posts, the repairs invisible unless you knew where to look. Elias stopped at the edge of a small clearing. The soil here was darker than the rest, richer, deeper, the kind of earth that held water and grew things strong. "Good soil," he said. Martha stood beside him. The wind pulled at her hair, at the hem of her dress. "What would you plant?" He was quiet for a long moment. His eyes moved across the clearing, measuring distances, imagining shapes that were not there yet. "Apple trees," he said finally. "Takes years before they bear fruit, but once they do, they keep giving. Shade in the summer, apples in the fall." He paused. "Something for someone to sit under, someday." Martha looked at the clearing, at the dark soil, at the man beside her, who was talking about years from now, about futures, about someday. She did not say anything, but she reached over and took his hand. He did not pull away. Evening came soft and slow. The sun touched the western hills and spread its light across the land, amber and rose, and the deep purple of approaching night. The air cooled. The insects began their chorus. The first stars appeared, faint and distant, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. 2 rocking chairs sat on the porch now. Elias had built them over the past week, working in the evenings after the day's labor was done. The wood was rough. He had no skill for fine carpentry, but the joints were solid, the seats comfortable, the runners smooth enough to rock without catching. Martha sat in one, Elias sat in the other. A wool blanket lay across their laps, shared against the cooling air. Inside, through the window, the coal oil lamp cast its warm glow across the table. The chairs, the tin type that still sat where Elias had placed it weeks ago. The Mustang grazed beyond the mended fence, her outline dark against the fading sky. The cattle had settled for the night. The land stretched out around them, quiet and vast, and full of the small sounds of living things. Martha rocked slowly. The chair creaked beneath her. The rhythm was steady, soothing. The kind of sound that could lull you to sleep or keep you company through the long hours of a wakeful night. Elias? Can I ask you something? He turned his head, looked at her. In the dim light, his face was softer than she had ever seen it. The hard lines eased. The tension drained away. You still scared? The question hung between them. The rocking chairs creaked. The insects sang. The stars brightened as the last light faded from the sky. Elias looked out at the land, at the fence he had mended, at the mare grazing in the pasture, at the clearing where apple trees might grow someday, where someone might sit in their shade and eat fruit from their branches and never know the hands that had planted them. Every day, he said. His voice was quiet, but steady. Every single day, I wake up scared. Scared of the sounds in my head. Scared of the memories. Scared I'll never be anything but what the war made me. He turned back to her. His eyes found hers in the darkness. But I ain't running no more. Martha reached across the space between their chairs. Her hand found his rough, calloused, warm. He took it, held it, did not let go. They sat together on the porch as the night deepened around them. The lamp glowed through the window. The stars wheeled overhead. The mare lifted her head. Ears pricked toward some sound only she could hear, then lowered it again and went back to grazing. The land was quiet. The fence was mended. The wounds were healing. And 2 people who had been alone for so long sat side by side in the darkness, hands clasped, rocking gently, watching the night come down over the hills. There is something quiet that settles in the chest after a story like this one. Not a conclusion, not an answer, just a weight that feels strangely familiar. The kind that comes from watching someone carry what we ourselves have carried, in our own way, in our own time. Many of us know what it is to be misunderstood, to have wounds that others cannot see. Some of us have stood outside a door, unsure if we were welcome. Some of us have been the one behind that door, unsure if we wanted to let anyone in. Perhaps you have known an Elias. Perhaps you have been a Martha. Perhaps you have simply sat with someone in silence, offering nothing but presence, and hoped it was enough. It is all right if this story did not tie itself into a neat bow. Some things are not meant to be resolved, only held, gently, and then set down when we are ready. The cabin still stands at the end of that road. The chairs still rock on the porch. And somewhere, in a clearing that smells of turned earth and possibility, apple trees are waiting to grow. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.